All right. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Jane Petersen. I'm the Senior Editor of International and Global Affairs at the Harvard Kennedy School Student Policy Review. I'm here with the 2016 Nobel Peace Prize laureate and former President of Colombia, Juan Manuel Santos. President Santos, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, it's wonderful. Welcome back,
Yes.
a former student here at the Kennedy School.
Always very happy to be back.
All right, great. Well, let's jump into it. You were the recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize in 2016 for your role in negotiating a peace treaty with the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, also known as FARC, which led to the end of the world's longest-running civil war at the time. What can other countries learn from this conflict and its resolution?
Well, every conflict is different. Every conflict has its own particular circumstances, but there are some common denominators. The first lesson from the conflict in Colombia is that every conflict can be resolved. For many, many years, they thought that peace in Colombia was impossible, a war that lasted more than 50 years. All my predecessors had failed, and they advised me not to try because it would be costly politically and in every respect. But I was determined, and I followed through, and I persevered, and you need to persevere no matter the obstacles you find, and you always find many obstacles when you are trying to achieve peace. It's much easier to make war than to make peace. Another lesson is that you have to dialogue. You have to sit down and establish a dialogue, but in a constructive way. Not sitting down to impose your points of view, but to sit down and learn from your enemies, learn from your adversaries, and try to find some common ground. In the case of Colombia and almost every armed conflict, it is also necessary to have the backing of your neighbors. That's why, for example, in Afghanistan, peace was never achieved. And if you go to the many conflicts that are right now, unfortunately, being fought in many places in the world, this is a very important condition. Every asymmetrical war needs the support of the international community, but especially of the neighbors.
In light of some of the conflicts that you've referenced, current President of Colombia, Gustavo Petro, he's been a harsh critic of Israel's siege of Gaza following the October 7th attacks. And Israel responded last month by suspending its military exports to Colombia. What are your thoughts on the situation, and what should Colombia's role be in the Middle East?
Well, not only in the Middle East, worldwide. Colombia has had a tradition of having good relations with everybody and trying to maintain a good dialogue with every country and not intervening, and this is a principle, very Latin American principle, not intervening in the affairs of other countries. So diplomacy means, yes, you can take positions, and I think everybody has the right to criticize what is happening. Of course, I mean, what is happening is awful. When you see what Hamas did, that has to be condemned. And when you see what is happening in Gaza, that has to be condemned. The life of one Israeli has the same value as the life of one Palestinian. And that is an approach which I think could help to ease tensions and hopefully start some kind of communication, some kind of dialogue.
Thank you. Pivoting to your new book, The Battle Against Poverty, you share your experience as one of the pioneers of the Multidimensional Poverty Index. How has the MPI changed Colombia?
Well, that was inspired by a professor who right now is in Harvard, by Amartya Sen. He was a Nobel Prize winner of economics. And 50 years ago, he was my professor at the London School of Economics. And he has a view of fighting poverty in a different way than has been applied by many countries during many years, which is how many people are poor according to how much they earn. And he changed that. And we applied that in Colombia for the first time, and now more than 60 countries are using the multi-dimensional index. That helped us tremendously to focus our resources, our social investment, where it had the most impact in the fight against poverty, and it allowed Colombia during those years to be the country in Latin America that decreased poverty and extreme poverty more than any other country, and also something which in Latin America we need desperately is to decrease inequality.
You are now a writer, and you have been a journalist in the past. You come from a long line of journalists. Your grandfather was a journalist, and your father and uncle ran Colombia's main newspaper, El Tiempo. What are your thoughts on the state of freedom of the press right now in Colombia?
Well, we still have freedom of the press, but there are many circumstances that are conspiring against this freedom of the press. For example, in the areas where criminal bands are gaining strength and control of the territory, one of their targets is the media, the press. On the other hand, a phenomenon which is worldwide, the big conglomerates taking over the media, the newspapers, the television channels, and using that media for their own interest. That also conspires against the freedom of the press. But we still have, I believe, enough freedom of the press to say that we have to keep nurturing that freedom, because this is, for me, one of the most important freedoms that any country could have.
Absolutely. You used your Nobel Prize speech to call for a rethinking of the war on drugs. What policies should combat drug use? What should those policies look like on a global scale?
I was a hardliner, and I applied hardline policies in my country, which has been the country that has suffered the most in the war on drugs that was declared more than 70 years ago. But this war has failed. And my own experience, because I, as Minister of Defense, sprayed the largest number of hectares that any president in the world. I extradited more drug lords and drug traffickers to the US than any president in the history. And yet at the end, I was like an static bicycle. You know, pedaling, pedaling, pedaling. I looked to the right or to the left, and I was in the same place. And that convinced me that we need a completely different approach. And I started studying what happened in the US 100 years ago when the mafias took over Chicago and LA. Well, they legalized the sale of liquor, which was the source of the power of the mafias at that time. So I became a defender of abolishing prohibition, regulating the drug traffic in order to take away from organized crime their main source of power, which is drug money.
Absolutely. And when you reference spraying hectares, you're of course referencing the coca plant in
Well, yes,
Colombia.
yes. I believe that by regulating it, the damage, the overall damage would be less. It's among many evils the lesser evil. Nobody wants their kids to consume drugs. Nobody wants drug trafficking and drug consumption. But it's inevitable. It's a reality. So we have to cope with it in the best way possible.
During your presidency, you took many steps to protect Colombia's biodiversity and fight climate change. What is your message to other world leaders looking to follow suit?
My message is very clear. You must do much more. We are way behind all the objectives that all the leaders promised they would reach. We are very, very far behind in every target. And the world is getting more and more difficult, climate change and the temperature is going up. And we see the big countries, the countries that should be at the forefront of this fight, rolling back. You see the UK, you see the US, you see France, you see Germany rolling back because of political considerations, because in the next elections, well, I better postpone this decision or this other decision. If that continues, we will be, and we as the planet, in big trouble.
What would be your first policy? Would it be a carbon tax, investment in new technologies?
Well, it's a comprehensive approach. You need to, for example, change the way that the food is produced right now. The amount of soil that we have destroyed by producing wheat, potatoes, or whatever, the way we are producing it, what has happened with the soil? That instead of absorbing carbon, right now they emit. That's one of the many, many policies that we have to put in place. Of course, change the energy to clean energy, try to bring down the production of fossil fuels as fast as possible. I know it's difficult. We have to change completely the paradigm of we need to produce more in order to be successful. This paradigm, and I learned that from our indigenous communities when I remember I went to them for them to give me an opinion on my development plan, and they said to me, Mr. President, we appreciate this gesture, but we cannot talk because we have completely different approach to what development means. You learned in Harvard, in the LSE, that you need to produce more. And for you, development is producing more cement, to build more roads, to build more houses, or producing more oil, to produce more cars, to mobilize. For us, development is maintaining our culture and defending Mother Nature. That was a very shocking but important response from them to me. And today I think they are quite right. We have been mistreating Mother Nature for centuries, and now Mother Nature is taking revenge.
The current president, Petro, has proposed suspending oil exports in an effort to fight climate change. Colombia mainly runs on renewables now, but they still have those oil leases that they can export to other countries. Your administration relied on this revenue. What are your thoughts on the president's proposal?
Well, the president is right from the long-term point of view. We all need to depend less on fossil fuels, and if possible, to completely abolish fossil fuels. But that cannot be done from one day to another. You have to do it gradually, as fast as possible, but gradually. So what I think is that he is correct, but he needs a much more realistic and effective approach, because words by themselves are very pretty, but we need more action.
Right, because I read that these leases, they count for some 10% of Colombia's GDP, so that would be quite a shock.
No, that's why I say that we can gradually change our dependence on fossil fuels, and we need to start now, and we are doing it. We have Colombia is a country that has tremendous potential on solar energy because we have one of the best spots in the world, and there's tremendous potential for wind energy because we have places where it's ideal for the production of this type of energy. We need to transform that as fast as possible and try to replace what is produced by fossil fuels with clean energy. It's almost common sense.
Yeah. You're addressing the Harvard Forum tomorrow. We have a generation that's sort of staring down the barrel of climate change, rising geopolitical conflict worldwide. My question is for young people, what would you say to them if they're looking at the future and they're pretty concerned?
Well, that never lose hope, first of all. And when you want something to happen and you fight for it, generally it happens. And the future is in the hands of young people. My generation owes an apology to the young generation because we did not fulfill our responsibilities. For example, with climate change, we did not take the decisions we should have taken. And I feel, and I ask for forgiveness because we put on the shoulders of the young people that responsibility. But it's a responsibility you, the young people, must take and must follow through. Otherwise, this common house, as the Pope calls it, our planet, will perish.
With that, thank you so much for joining us today, President Santos. It's really been a great pleasure having you on campus again. And yeah, that'll be all for today. Thank you.